I want to bring in Eylon Levy to this conversation, former spokesperson for the State of Israel. You join us now. Thanks so much for your time on this.
Hello, Alex.
What goes on? I mean, since that day 2 years ago, right, so much has changed and so much of the narrative has changed and the facts and the figures. But on this day, how do you reflect?
Look, it's been 2 years that feels like a decade and feels like it's been one long day without end. October 7th was the worst day in Israel's history when we were invaded by a barbaric terrorist organization that perpetrated the most unspeakable atrocities. And I won't repeat them on the radio in case there are children listening, but we're talking about the most sadistic horrors. And they dragged us into a war, and they dragged us into a war while they were holding innocent hostages. At least 20 live hostages are still trapped in Gaza. They're being held underground, they're being starved, they're being tortured, and Hamas is using them to get a ransom. It's using them as bargaining chips to try to survive the war that it started as it threatens to do October 7th again and again. So today in Israel, it's a day where a lot of people are reliving the fear and the trauma of October 7th, but also a day of cautious optimism as we hear news that Hamas might just be about to agree to a deal that will end this horrible war it started 2 years ago and free those hostages.
Yeah, there's always a but, though, with this organization, right? There's always there always seemingly is a but. And so, again, time will tell on this. And yet so much celebration around the world. I mean, even here in Canada, in Toronto, Montreal, BC, I don't think I need to tell you, even though you don't live here, that there will be celebrations for the martyrs, which is obscene, and yet this has very much become normalized. How do we undo this?
The October 7th massacre caused millions of people around the world to lose their freaking minds. I mean, the protests we see against Israel began as celebrations of Hamas's atrocities. October 7th did not horrify everyone in the world. It inspired millions of people who looked at Hamas's balaclava-clad rapists and saw freedom fighters who saw Hamas's barbaric atrocities and saw them as acts of liberation. And they are ascendant. They are ascendant on the street and university campuses. The Harvard-Harris poll says half of young Americans support Hamas over Israel, not the Palestinians over Israel, Hamas over Israel. And this is a sickness for Western countries that you are going to have to deal with because there's a problem for your democracy. I mean, Israel will survive the students who are hosting bake sales to celebrate the jihadist atrocities of October 7th. I don't know how Canada, Britain, and the United States are going to fare if these people become the next generation of journalists and lawyers and politicians. So I think it starts with understanding that Western countries have a serious homegrown extremism problem of people who wrap themselves in the language of human rights and international law, but they're pro-terrorist, they're pro-jihad, they are pro-violence, they glorify violence, and they are a danger. They are a danger more to the health of Western democracies than they are to this country.
Right, and I understand that, which I think, if people understand, I mean, there are a lot of Jews going back to Israel. I mean, in Toronto, I never thought I'd see the day, but there are people who live in Jewish areas who now have 24/7 armed security living outside their house, which is just not only obscene, it should be unacceptable, and yet it is. So they will go back to Israel, which I think some would think that's crazy, but they feel safer there than they do here, where we have leaders who don't ever shut this down and yet politicize it, right? You got Keir Starmer out there just after Macron and Carney put this ridiculous, and very political motion forward about recognizing a Palestinian state. And then you got Keir Starmer out there today saying, well, no, you can't go out there and be a pro-Palestinian protesters and that. It's like they've not been consistent. And frankly, I think they've undermined.
I think it's worse than that. Yeah, it's worse than that. I mean, these Western leaders have created a monster that they cannot control. They have tried to appease and placate the violent mobs on the street who have been chanting for jihad, chanting for intifada, calling to bring political violence to the streets of the West. And instead of standing up to them and shutting down the lies that are being told about Israel, and standing by their democratic ally as it fights to bring back the hostages and bring down the jihadi regime that is threatening to take more hostages, they tried to pay them off. And so you end up with the nonsensical recognition of a Palestinian state that does not exist, that has only emboldened Hamas. It has empowered Hamas. It has led Hamas to feel vindicated in its decision to launch this war 2 years ago. And if we want lasting peace, and if we want sanity to prevail in the West as well, this war has to end with Hamas knowing that it's lost, and with this violent protest movement in the West feeling isolated and on the back foot, and not feeling that it has managed through violence and intimidation to scare good, ordinary people and to intimidate Western governments into abandoning an ally at war and empowering and emboldening jihadists.
I will get many, many texts and lots of emails and lots of comments and certainly calls, whatever, of people saying whatever they want to say. But what do you say to those who consistently call this a genocide? And I will say this: Israel's not great at the messaging war. Hamas is very good at it, and they've been able to rewrite a lot of things. But what do you say to those who say, well, I will never, and for whatever I felt for Israel before, I cannot any longer defend because they are carrying out a genocide? What do you say to them?
That is the most infuriating lie that has been spread in order to shield Hamas from the consequences of the October 7th massacre. And today, October 7th, is an occasion to remember that the October 7th massacre was an act of genocide. Hamas's terrorist army invaded with the goal of massacring as many people as they could, as brutally as they could, because they were Jews, out of a vision of the destruction of the Jewish state and the murder or exile of everyone living here. October 7th was openly genocidal, and Israel is fighting a war in order to prevent that genocidal enemy from threatening our people again. And it's true, people have been killed. It's horrific. And people have been killed because that genocidal enemy, Hamas, fought this war from a network of tunnels underneath schools and buildings and prevented people from evacuating when Israel tried to get them to safety, and hijacked humanitarian aid and fired missiles from between people's houses. Hamas is solely responsible for all the suffering it has brought on the Gaza Strip by launching the October 7th war with the act of genocide of the October 7th massacre. And when people put that accusation against Israel, which has said from the beginning this war ends the moment all the hostages are home and Hamas is dismantled, it's an inversion of history that projects onto Israel Hamas's crimes and tries to shield Hamas so they can do this again and again, just as they've promised.
Yeah. Just before I let you go, and you know Benjamin Netanyahu, right? If Benjamin Netanyahu weren't part of the conversation, right, would it be a different conversation? Because a lot of the ire and anger is directed at him. And so is the Netanyahu figure the cause of this, or is that the excuse?
There is an intense debate in Israel about how we achieve the goals of bringing the hostages home and bringing down Hamas and what the strategy should be. But there is consensus in Israel that if this is not the last Gaza war, then there will be a next Gaza war. Hamas has to go one way or another. And so whoever is Israel's leader at this time would have to ask the question of how you get rid of a jihadi organization that is only a few hundred meters away from people's homes inside Israel. Let's remember how tiny this area is. The Gaza Strip is a few hundred meters away from people's homes in Israel. And this is the most difficult urban battlefield in history. I think Canadians have forgotten what Canada did to Mosul and Raqqa as part of an international coalition to bring down ISIS, which was not holding American hostages, Canadian hostages, was not firing rockets at Canadian cities, and was not right next to Canadian homes. So any Israeli leader would have to deal with that difficult question of the urban battlefield that Hamas built out of its strategy to try to get people killed for the cameras, because it knows that the media coverage makes Israel look bad, isolates it, and supports the Palestinian cause.
Yeah, it has been like that. Nonetheless, I very much appreciate your time on this day, and hope to talk to you again. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Alex. Thank you.